All right, the Immersive Programming series rolls on here. Episode 3, we're going to take a look at something that's probably a little bit different or new for a lot of coaches, and that is what I've just termed to be my movement literacy session. So the overall goal or purpose of this is designating a full session. So for me, this is going to be the second time that I see somebody where in the first one, as we covered in the last episode, is going to be dedicated to the conventional intake and the assessment piece. That following session is going to be now dedicated to movement literacy for me. And I'll start it out by saying this. A coaching position is a teaching responsibility. And I think it's, something that gets lost in translation sometimes, but as a coach, we really should continue to see ourselves as educators. So as we go through this, that's really going to be kind of the overarching principle, is that we are going to take an allotted period of time early on in our time working with somebody, and we're really going to hammer the teaching aspects of things. And then, as we'll discuss in this, we'll kind of transition it into giving the athlete an opportunity for them to get their points across and give some attention to detail on the specific things that they're coming in with. So again, any coaching position is going to be integrated with an educating responsibility. And I think that the other side of this too that we tend to lose sight of is, we're really trying to change behavior or psychology as much as we are physical aspects or physiology. And with that, we need to take it, to heart that we are going to be responsible for bridging those gaps and helping to transition them from a behavioral standpoint. So with this, the overall goal here for the movement literacy session is really to just help the athlete understand their body and the specific things that they're coming in with. We want to introduce our primary movements or our functional patterns, the things that we're going to continue to build off of as we go along. This is also a great opportunity to really provide context for the common cueing that we'll use, and really just kind of giving them some understanding of the nuance of the training process and how this is going to evolve for them. And then, I'm always going to try to take the last few minutes of the session to introduce their warm-up components and some of the at-home things that I'm going to want them to do. So this all starts out here at step 1 with movement, mechanics, and awareness. So for me, the first thing that I'm going to do is really just generally describe how joints move and how they work. And, for the people who have made the claims or been very steadfast in suggesting that athletes don't really care about the educational side, or they don't really care about the details, I just think that's bullshit, flat out. I think, that of course in a group of, 20 kids, there's going to be, 4 or 5 that could absolutely care less about what we have to say, and that's fine. But just because, 15 to 20% of our group may not care about the details, we can't leave the remaining 15 hanging just because there's a couple of people who aren't interested. So, and again, with this, we're not giving them grad level anatomy or biomechanics. These are all going to be done in layman's terms. I'll often use a whiteboard to provide illustration with this, but I always start out with the actions and the mechanics of the foot. So we want them to understand the triplanar stability and different centers of pressure across the foot, how the foot works in conjunction or in tandem with the lower leg, and then really how that sets the origin for force transfer and for force development. From the foot, we then come up to the hips. Once we get to the hips, we want them to understand, just the general position of having a neutral pelvis, what that looks like, what that feels like, and then just giving them a good understanding of how a basic ball and socket joint works. So for the hip positioning, this is something that I'll translate into the major stances that we'll work from. So showing them the hip position in a bilateral stance versus a unilateral versus a kickstand versus a full split. And then generally what we're looking for in terms of their responsibility or their positioning across those different stances. From there, we work up the chain, looking at the T-spine, kind of how the trunk and the spine move. This is where I'll throw in my spinal reciprocity or the spinal engine mechanics. I will introduce the coiling concept, or getting the opposite shoulder to close off to the opposite hip, and then getting that internal rotation lock above and below the pelvis. And again, relating it back to them. So if I have a throwing athlete, these are going to be slightly different than if I have a lineman or if I have a basketball or a volleyball player. But your job is to take the basic anatomy and biomechanical components and then tie them into how that athlete specifically moves, any individual deficits or any kind of movement impairments, and then the sport that they are playing. From there, we come up again. Now we're looking at the shoulders. So again, another ball and socket joint, and then really just describing that to them how the position is going to govern the function of the shoulder. So if we have somebody who comes in a state of true kyphosis, just giving them demonstration or illustration of how that narrowing of the space is going to compromise overhead movements. And then I'll kind of take this back around and look at it from just a total body or global integrative relationship, and just discuss kind of, again, the basics of kinetic integration and how everything from the foot and the ground works upward. And if we don't have good synergy in our movement, we're going to have to work harder for less return. So from there, we're going to now transition into the function, what I have deemed to be my functional 5, and then kind of looking at our primary movements. So, the goal here is really simple. We're just going to introduce them to the things that they're going to be frequently seeing thereafter. And what I think this does, and what I've noticed so far, is it really consolidates down the time thereafter. So even though it may seem like a large investment up front to take 45 or 60 minutes to walk an athlete through a movement literacy session, I promise you on the back end, you're going to save that time and then some, because the sessions are just going to run a lot more smoothly. And, I have my items down here and what I have found success with, but you can literally sub this out with anything. So for me, it looks like Turkish get up, a single leg bridge pattern with some kind of a rolling or an arm reach. I want to look at a 4-way crawl, overhead march and a switch, split squat and a lunge. So, these are things that I have just kind of capsulated into what fits my population the best. But we can look at this a million different ways. In addition to that, and this is, more permitting time, I'll get them into a hex bar deadlift. I'll get them into a split squat or a push press or, whatever it may be. And then just give them the roots of what we're looking for on these movements. So then that way, when they come back around to the next session, I'm not going to have to spend as much time doing base intakes or intros. We can kind of just pick up and hit the ground running and get to work. This section specifically is also something that I'll treat as a pseudo assessment, right? So it's just a continuation of what we did on day one, but now I'm not only just looking at the biomechanical aspects of this or the movement aspects, but how do they best respond to instruction? Are they more visual oriented, or are they more kinesthetic oriented? Do they need multiple demos? Can they just hear me say something and then apply it right away? This is again going to be another little breadcrumb for me, where if I have somebody who is quick to respond, picks things up quickly, that programming is then going to look different than if it's for somebody who, needed to have multiple demonstrations and have me get in there and manually position them for something like a hinge or whatever it may be. So this is another little nuance here, where this is another collection piece where I'm going to be able to put together more efficient and effective programming based on how this day runs. Then we get into the back half of the session here, and now this is where in the first half, I'm really trying to get my priorities across and then give them the things that I find to be most valuable. Now on the back end, I kind of want to transition and be on more of the receiving end. So we're going to start this by looking at the athlete's specific deficits, and I want them to become more aware of that and then give them something tangible to really help improve it. So if we just go off of this goofy little demo picture here, right? We'll pretend that somebody has, elbow tendonitis, or maybe even something more serious where they're coming off of a UCL repair. But I want to specifically look at the joint. We've already assessed it, so we know the biomechanical components. We know how the tissue or the joint is functioning. But now I want to make it make sense to them. Whereas in the intake and the assessment, I'm making it make sense for me. Now I'm going to reiterate, but put it into terms where it makes more sense to them. And then we give them something tactile or something tangible. So, as shown here, teaching them how to do voodoo floss for themselves buys me more time to be able to do things that are a little bit more, not necessarily effective, but a little bit more detailed or involved. Because if I can teach them something simple like this and then instruct it to them as, hey, just get here 10, 15 minutes early, throw this voodoo floss on, or, maybe they buy one for themselves, so now it becomes at home applications. But in either case, I'm just trying to create more time for myself and for the athlete when we are in person together. And then additionally, with that, we want to make sure that we're giving them solutions and strategies and how to modify or regress when needed. I think this is even more important when you're working with teams in a group setting. Sometimes things get lost in the shuffle. And if you have an athlete who's coming off of something like a UCL tear, you guys are working, landmine presses for that day. You want to show them and teach them that they want to initiate the pattern through the hips and then kind of rotate the shoulders as the arm is going into flexion, so that we can reduce the amount of stress on the elbow joint itself. So that's something where when we have 15 kids that are running through a circuit and the landmine press is one of them, you're not going to be able to give them the attention or the detail that's needed in that moment. So by setting it up in advance here in the movement literacy session, you're essentially giving that responsibility to the athlete to understand how to navigate those things once they're in motion. And then finally here, we're just going to finish out with a whiteboard review and a Q&A. So on my end, I'm going to reiterate all the major points that were covered. Again, addressing the things that are specific to them in terms of deficits or injuries or priorities. And then I am again going to kind of take a step back and then give them the floor, and really just encourage them, hey, anything that you need me to clear up or anything that you think, needs a little bit more detail or attention that we haven't touched on, let me know right now and we can cover it. This is really your time. So, in summary here, it's not, again, like, we're not trying to jam, everything in a 60-minute session. We're not trying to have them drinking out of a fire hose. We want to kind of give them a broad parameter and a broad spectrum of things that are going to be priorities for us moving forward. But then again, really importantly, just discussing and giving attention to detail for their individual deficits. And then from there, letting them, kind of voice their questions or concerns. So by the end of a movement literacy session, the goals should be met, right? We should have a basic understanding of anatomy and movement principles, understand how the body is moving, how someone's individual movement impairments or deficits affect them. They should be familiar to the context of what we're doing, the cueing that we're going to be utilizing, and along with that, understanding the overall training process, what your expectations are, and how they are going to realize their training outcomes, throughout our time together. Building in the at-home and the warm-up stuff as we go through this, and then, of course, as I mentioned, giving them an opportunity to address any questions or concerns. So I'll just leave you all with this. I can honestly say that the Movement Literacy Day is something that has been extremely effective for me. I've really enjoyed this process. It's almost given a little bit more of a human element right out of the gate, and I think that it just shows a good attention to detail and care. And I think that from what I've recognized already is I'm able to progress a lot quicker. I'm able to move through things a little bit more efficiently, which then buys me more time to work more stuff into the limited hours that I'm seeing somebody. So movement literacy session, second time you're seeing somebody, highly, highly effective. And, this is something that you can create and modify exactly to fit the specifications of what you're doing.